to work tonight.
And we are excited to be here and talk to you about this, because this is something that, it has been a marrying of two passions, this topic, just because with leadership development, without some data around determining what we need to measure and how a leader needs to be successful, we often see you're not successful, and we know that. And I know, just talking with you previously, that you know that as well. How I would like to start off is I really want to hear from you, and I know you're more on the consulting side, but just in organizations that you go into, and for the two of you in your organizations, if you had to define what coaching means from an organizational perspective, what would you say? And Mark as well, just what do you all, how does your organization define it?
Our organization, or how I want to see it?
You know how it's defined. the reality, not necessarily how you want to see it.
High-performing sales rep that moved into management.
Okay. All
Not
right.
necessarily a manager, but moved into management.
Moved into management.
Which doesn't necessarily make them a good manager.
Absolutely not, and that, because it's a whole other skill set. But they get rewarded for being really good at their job, and then they get put into this other job, but then there's this gap. So how are we helping that person fill the gap? Are we giving them training, coaching, a number of different things? And often, I mean, I saw that at UPS. Interesting, I don't know, interesting, sad, I guess, is when you got demoted or when they didn't know what to do with the manager would go on a special assignment and come back, and they had no place for them, so guess where they put them? Training. So we had managers in training that didn't believe in training, hated training, didn't believe anything they were doing, and they're leading and teaching the future leaders of the company. So that told me a lot about, and I can only speak in where I was, but that told me a lot about how we value what we're going to talk about today. Because to me, when you put somebody in there because it's their area of development, I'm not sure how serious you are about wanting this to be impactful. Because I think you need to have somebody that's an example of that, leading that. Thank you. So what does it mean in your organization, Greg?
Well, I'm a CTI trained coach, and I've been consulting since 2004. And the organization I'm currently, where I have, I guess my largest client, the CEO likes me to meet with all the managers at least once a month. We've developed a coaching plan, and so their goals and objectives are looked at every month. All their process work is looked at every month. And so for me, it's fairly structured, which is nice for me because I'm a very structured person. So that's what coaching means in electric.
Wow, you're far ahead. I mean, the structure of that's impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive that you have that. Yeah. What have you seen from your side of it, Dan?
Well, from my perspective, what I do is I look at 20 different basic leadership characteristics, and I assess people on their abilities in those areas. And then I take them through the process of finding out which ones they need to focus on first, and then coaching them. And as the coach, I don't tell them what to do. I basically help them discover what it is, where their strengths, where their weaknesses are in those areas. And then we start to talk about some things they can do to become stronger in those areas. And then we systematically go through that, and it's done on a regular interval.
You all know, from your perspectives, from the work you do, what coaching means, where you work?
Coaching means helping people to be the best that they can be at what they're doing, to find out what their goals, their desires are, and helping them to achieve those goals.
And just setting goals, helping people to achieve those goals, as well as giving them the coaching and training that they need so that they could hit their KPIs if there's anything that needs adjusting. We help our clients adjust and really help them to succeed with their sales goals in general, and social selling in particular, because that's what I do. And just citing all those data points, and if they're not making them, we go through and find out why and help them and coach them so that they do succeed.
Can I just throw?
Sure.
I think it's a two-way street as well. I think they both kind of said some things that are important, and that is that coaching is also about the individual themselves and making them better, making them feel better about themselves. But it's also about coaching them to help the organization achieve the success they're trying to achieve. And so it's not just one or the other. I think it's really a marriage of both, because if you're not helping the company grow and then achieve what they need, then you're not really being an asset. But likewise, if you're not getting any sort of development or improvement in your own your own abilities, then that's not going to make you want to stay around.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to talk about that, the impact on business, because I wish I could say that a majority of the time we're connecting coaching to business strategy and helping this leader be better, and how are we connected to that. But I will tell you from my coaching, rarely do we connect it to that, because they don't really even know for sure what that is. I mean, I was on the phone with an HR manager today, and they want to develop a leadership program for mid-level management, which is awesome, because that's a very forgotten about group in my experience with working with people, and a very critical group to do that. And she said, well, I don't know, what do we need to put in this program? And I said, well, I don't know, what do you need your leaders to do in your organization to be successful? I mean, she goes, can you send me a checklist? Which I thought was so funny, because she is on the Myers-Briggs. She's an ESTJ, which if you know about that, I mean, she is very, like, everything is a check-off. And she said, can you just send me a list of things? And we go through and pick. And so, you know, I did send her something, but it's very wild. Well, I was happy to not hear you all say something that I have had a lot of experience with too, is that coaching is a very negative or punitive thing in organizations. And I have one particular client that how they figured this out was on their PIPs, their performance improvement plans, which are not fun. You don't get put on a PIP if you're high potential.
Right.
They noticed that on their PIP, the word coaching was used throughout it. And so anytime somebody said they wanted coaching, or someone said they had to get coaching, everybody automatically assumed it was because they were on a PIP. And they're like, no, we're giving you coaching because we want to develop you. So they had to redo their PIP to take coaching off, because in their culture, it wasn't a good thing. I mean, it was because you were on your way out. And I'm not going to say that coaching I don't get coaching engagements like that they have 6 months to turn it around, but that's not what coaching should be used for.
I was formerly in the pharmaceutical industry with GlaxoSmithKline, and the way I got exposed to coaching was the top 10% of the organization got coaching as a perk, as a benefit, because they knew the data that coaching is much more effective and the return on investment is much higher. And when you stick coaches with people who have, with superstars, rather than trying to salvage all the poor managers that you just hired into the organization. So it was actually a perfect Glaxo to be with a coach. And I don't know if anybody's heard of Steve Mitten, but Steve Mitten was my coach for several years when I was at Glaxo, former president of the ICF. So it was, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's always a negative connotation, but if companies know how to use coaching, it can be really, really powerful.
Right, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit of, how are you cascading it down, and how is the top receiving it? Do your C-suite level, your directors, your VPs, do they get coaching? Are they, and I know Humana, and I can say this because, I have friends that work there, they only coach C-suite. I mean, their mentality is that top, that top. So the mid-level managers and the frontline managers, which are responsible for a lot, don't have access to it. They have access to some other things. So, that's why I just say it's important before you start down this path of helping an organization or working at an organization that we all have a collective agreement on how we define coaching. And I find that it just depends on the leader. Sometimes it's punitive, sometimes it's to develop a high potential, but it's never across the board a consistent thing, from my experience. I will say that.
I would pitch in and say, I think you guys are a very atypical crowd.
Yes.
From who we are usually talking to.
It's our normal audience.
Yeah, so we're a little bit, it's probably going to be preaching to the choir a little bit, because, you guys will probably be as shocked as we are at a lot of the answers we get to that question. Well, coaching is the annual performance conversation. Mm-hmm. Coaching is training. Coaching, really, it's a little scary what's going on in some organizations. So if some of it sounds like a little bit too basic, please understand where we're coming from. And feel free to pitch in with your experience, because this is great.
Well, and I want to tell you, and you may have heard of this resource, I just came across this resource, but it's called The Feedback Imperative. It's a book that's come out by Ann Carroll. And anyway, one of the interesting statistics that came from this was 65%, from her research, 65% of people say that their performance review feedback contains surprises. And I think that is, that's to Whitney's point, and there's a whole bunch of research being done right now on just completely getting away from performance reviews, because some organizations aren't consistently doing them anyway, but they're talking about going to this continuous feedback thing, where leaders should be talking to people all the time, so that I always call, feedback reviews or performance reviews surprise birthday parties, they shouldn't be a surprise birthday party. Like, you shouldn't walk in and have all these things that you didn't know. I mean, it should just be a validation of, this is everything you and I have talked about. Okay, now let's just talk about moving forward. But that's often, again, if they're done consistently, they're not really done well. And it's not any meaningful data. They're either emailed or just sign off on this, we're not even going to discuss it. So it's unfortunate. But because people like us are out there, we can make a difference.
So the question I have is what, obviously the answer is normally, well, I don't have time to do that. So what is the magic answer? What is it that you tell your clients that gets them to say, well, okay, I'll do that?
What is this costing you to not do it? And you've got this leader that, in some cases, the people I coach, it's a high turnover for this person's department. This person isn't able to make their goals. They're not be able to, they're having issues with their boss. A lot of it's that. A lot of it's a personality conflict with the boss that causes challenges. So I ask the question, what is this costing you that this person is not performing at the level that you like? So you need to slow it down and put some time up front so that it doesn't cost you time later. Because eventually, if you don't do it, you probably have to end up replacing that leader. And we talked about that cost. Depending on that person's level, what is that going to cost you to get the person out of the organization or move them and then have to hire somebody new? But I'll tell you, most organizations, that's just like, that's way too much research. But if you can just get them to start thinking about what is it costing you, then that's a different way to frame it.
It's like the old joke, really old joke, what if we train someone and they leave, and it's like, what if we don't train them to stay? The same thing is true with coaching.
Oh, absolutely.
What if we don't coach them? It's like, they're not going to improve.
Well, and I always say it's not the ones that, quit and leave you worry about, it's the people who quit and stay.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of quit and stayers in your organization. Yeah, absolutely. Did you have a comment or good? Oh. All right, we'll just go through a couple of these things, and as Whitney said, I feel like we're dealing with experts in the room. But this is just, from my research perspective, this is what coaching is when it's done well. And this is all common sense that is not often, as we've talked about, common practice, which is really amazing. Because all of these things, I don't know anybody that would want to look at this and go, God, coaching, that just, why would I want to do that? None of those things are good. You look at all the benefits you get from doing this, but Dean, I think it goes back to what you just said about the thing, time. Leaders don't feel like they have time. And I encourage when I coach people that are leading people, are you meeting with your people regularly? I encourage one-on-ones. And I had a VP ask me, do I need to set up those meetings reoccurring? And I said, I don't know, do you? No, he really thought that. He said, I have a queue, they know where I am, they can come and talk to me. That was his philosophy. He was a VP. I was like, don't underestimate people needing you, the value of those conversations.
What I found is that it's really, it's all driven by the owner of the company or the CEO of the company.
Absolutely.
If they have an vested interest in the coaching process, then everybody has time for it, right? It's when they don't. It's when the top management really doesn't see the value in it, and it's like, okay, now we don't know if we have enough time to do that or not.
It's challenging to sell it when the top doesn't.
Yeah, it's impossible almost to affect change.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because when I do one-on-one trainings on the People Links platform, which is a social selling platform, and I get like sales managers and VPs and people like that too. So when I do that type of training with them, I'm selling People Links, because all their employees are doing it. I'm selling this to them and telling them how the employees use it, so that they get buy-in on it and everything else, so that their employees use it too. And it always seems like that after I teach a VP or a sales manager, somebody like that ownership by the employees of doing the social selling stuff actually goes up.
Well, again, if it's not punitive, and
right, yeah, it's not punitive.
So
right.
many people, it's sold. You're broken, and we need to fix you. And I've told a number of HR people when I go in, I'm like, this isn't about fixing somebody that they're broken. They're not broken. You just need them to behave or perform a job in a different way. You need to influence the outcome of that. But to say that you're going to try to change somebody with that, that's not coaching. And when people say that, that's how coaching gets the bad rap that it has, because it's like, I'm going to be changed, I don't want to be changed, and then people resist. Exactly like you said, you're not changing me. But imagine if I said, what if I could help you, like a trainer, get in better shape? You want to feel better, you want to get up and walk, then that's a different way to sell it.
Yep.
Your comment about, a manager that'll just stay in his or her office and just, laissez-faire type thing. I know someone, Frankie, that she was brilliant. She graduated from really impressive university, incredible researcher. She was eventually made director of the program, and so she had that intelligence, but she just expected her people to just do what they're supposed to do, and it was like, we're adults, behave like adults.
Because she knew, I know what to do, they should know what to
Behave
do.
like adults and just do what you're supposed to do. And so there was but she had no experience in leadership, no experience in coaching. And so no one told her, so it's sort of like, it's hard to know you're doing something wrong if no one
tells you,
if no one tells you, if no one prepares you. And,
right.
And it's a very funny situation because it's going to come from the bottom up, and then someone below is going to say, well, you should really be coaching us. Or from the top down, it's like, well, you have to have someone higher up notice this.
And model it.
And
give feedback, and most people live in a world with no feedback.
But it didn't exist, it never happened.
But what's interesting too is, we hear a lot about millennials now. And one of the things that I talk about is there's no such thing as leadership for millennials.
We talk about that.
There's true leadership. It doesn't matter, millennials, they're just bold enough to tell you to your face.
Exactly.
And they're bold enough to say, well, I'm not going to work here anymore. Whereas people of my generation, we stayed because we were afraid. We thought this is the best job I'll ever have. I'll never do another job like this.
And organizations like UPS, they led you to believe that. They're like, we may not pay the best, but you have a secure job. You have a good benefits package. They really did, and you were just like, my gosh, they have to be truth speakers. I have to stay. Yeah, that was just. But now people are like, they're arguing the premise. They don't accept it. They challenge it. It's a good point. All right, so what are some of the benefits? And I think we've really, touched on some of this. I think the greatest thing with the coaching component of it is the self-awareness. Most people assume if there is no feedback, that what? They're doing fine. Yeah.
Right.
And I always ask the question, if your boss were to call you right now, if you were to get a text from your boss that says, call me, either first thing in the morning or right now, how many of you think it's because you're getting a promotion? Nobody ever, everybody's like, no, I'm thinking, who screwed up? What did I do wrong? But it's unfortunate, but that's the way, is that we think if we just don't hear anything, everything's okay. And the minute that you call me in to talk to me, I've done something wrong. So, the big thing about that is however you do coaching, externally or just training leaders to coach their own people, it really is a great self-awareness piece. But people also have to be willing to accept the feedback. So, that's another component of it. These are some common misconceptions about coaching. And we've mentioned already some of these. I think the biggest one, Dan, you hit on, is it just takes too much time to do it. I don't have time to do that. And I'm like, well, it's an investment in the most expensive resource you have in your organization, and your people. And if you want to develop them, then it is. Coaching is the same as feedback, advice, and encouragement. No, coaching is really helping somebody fulfill a goal or get them to the next level of where they need to be. And I see this one also be, if you hire good people, coaching isn't necessary. So there it goes back and forth between, do we just coach high potentials, or we only coach the bottom 10%, which I know some organizations won't even coach the bottom 10. They won't even invest any money in that. So it's like, where do you find that happy medium of who do we coach? And that's something that the organization needs to agree on collectively. Who is it going to be that's going to have access to that? So what is a coaching culture? And there's been, just some interesting stuff coming out about this and all this feedback piece. But my interpretation of a coaching culture based on research, experience, working in organizations, is it's really someplace that there is regular feedback. And like I said, I'm super excited to see all of these articles on continuous feedback. I have a friend who works in a company, she's German, and she works for a German employer, and she's in organizational development at this company in Germany. And she has to do research and present in Dusseldorf next Thursday on an alternative to performance evaluations. So how do they develop a continuous feedback culture? And I think that's so awesome that in Germany, they're looking at that, and they're even looking at creating an app that their managers and their leaders can walk around, and when they see somebody doing something good, they can pull up this app, and they'll have all of their people in there, and they can make comments so that they'll remember to go back and give feedback. So I was like, that's awesome, very, very efficient with Germany, you know, I'm part German, we are efficient, we are efficient. But yeah, she's like, we're going to have an app, and we're going to ask people to, I was like, well, you know, it also has to be genuine, but she said it's just a way to get people to document and, you know, look at things. Huh?
There really is an app for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I want to point out with this is that coaching, if you choose to have an external person do that, the external coach is a supplement to the process, not the main thing. You know, an external coach should not be hired to do the job the manager should do. And I get brought in all the time to be that. And I will even say, can we meet every other month, the leader, to talk about the progress of your person? Because this person can come in and tell me they're amazing and they're doing everything they need to be doing, and I have to take it on face value that they are. So I need to have constant contact with the leader, and I've had leaders tell me, don't worry about it. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I see this as a missing piece that could be important. We can help organizations improve upon.
I think it's the same argument that's made, because I'm not on the side of the fence that says we should get away with or do away with performance evaluations. I think that's a mistake. I agree with it. Most companies don't do them correctly. So when I was at Glaxo, we spent weeks learning how to do performance evaluations and how to coach and develop our employees. I think that's the problem with managers, that when I get called to coach an employee that's not doing well, it's because that manager wasn't trained properly.
Didn't know how.
Management training in the United States in general is very, very poor.
If it exists at all.
Yeah, and we always take our best people, promote them into management, which is a double loss to the organization.
It's exactly what you said. It's like,
High
you
performers.
are a really good worker
Yeah.
or programmer. I see this in IT a lot because I end up coaching a lot of IT because they need to be extroverts. And I'm like, wait a minute, they were an amazing programmer, and now now you want them to go out among the people. Yeah, they just want to sit in a room and program. And now they've got 10 programmers looking at them for leadership, to lead.
They're miserable.
And they're
We're in
miserable.
software development, so you're not gonna have extroverts. And we're lucky enough at HP, we have management track and technical track. Not everybody does that. Your high performers go out and do cool projects.
Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely great. Dom, did you have a comment or anything? Or are you good? I saw you.
Yeah, I was just agreeing because, I mean, especially with the people link side, with the software things we do, I mean, we do the coaching, training, and things like that, but everything, you know, it's like, we emphasize, it's the managers that need to really do this. I mean, we're the outside guys, we know we're the outside guys.
Right.
You are the inside, we'll assist you as much as we can, but it's up to you to really do this right and do it well.
And I tell people that up front all the time. I'm like, okay, if you're not going to be part of the process, you do know that we can only take this
So far.
So just, understand. Because, it's our credibility when we're out there doing that. It's like, coaching didn't work. And I have found that sometimes that's the plan. I've had a couple situations like that. So why would I want to have a coaching culture? As I said, why would you not? But here are a lot of the problems that I see in organizations, and I'm sure you can attest to this in your own organization, or even again, Dan, that you've got, is that, the top one up there is communication. Not good communication with managers, their employees, not clear understanding of goals. And that's how we lead to serious dysfunction in teams, when nobody really knows what they're supposed to be doing. And what makes it even worse is fast forward a year, and you sit down and have a performance evaluation with somebody, and you get to tell them that they didn't meet their goals. And then the person looks at you and says, I didn't even know we had goals. And those are real situations that happen. So then how do you really hold somebody accountable to something that they didn't even know was a thing? I'm absolutely amazed. And that's where we get frustration, you get turnover. Although I've had some people that will argue that, because I have one client that said nobody ever leaves here. You look at our turnover numbers, they're very low. And if we were ever to get sued, we have enough money to write a check. And that's really their mentality. But I've been there now for 3 years, and what I'm finding is there are a lot of employees that are like we just talked about. They have quit, and they have stayed. And they're doing the bare minimum, and they're cashing some pretty big paychecks to do nothing.
Yeah.
But that's acceptable in that culture. for now, until it starts, that's the thing, until it really starts costing on the bottom line or the impact of business, they're not gonna do about it. I mean, really, that's like, well, we're making money, and then we'll argue with that. I'm like, well, how much more effective and happy and productive could you be if you were doing some of these things? But, all right, so some of the those are some of the root causes of the problem. This is a vision that one organization had. They actually had a vision for a coaching culture. So I just give this to you as an example. To me, it seems like, nirvana, happy. I have yet, and I attended a conference where I heard this and someone spoke on it. So I can't attest to you that I've worked in that culture, but this is what they professed as their vision. So I thought that was pretty interesting that one organization has actually created a vision around that, and all their leaders know that. And it's coaching. There's not one person that can't have access to coaching.
Right.
And I think that's definitely as it should be. So some key challenges that I have found from the trenches with trying to get this through with organizations I work with. First of all, it's like I started off with, that's why I asked the question, what does coaching mean in your organization? Because if you're going to try to create a culture where people know they have access to coaching, they know what it is, we need to know what it means to us. And you can look up Webster's dictionary definition of it or Wikipedia it, but it doesn't really matter. It's like I told that HR leader today, I can't tell you what should be in your leadership development program. I mean, that's got to come from your own, what is your pain? What are your challenges? What do you need your leaders to have? Which was interesting. But I think a lot of companies today, everybody is so busy and change is happening so fast that we want a quick fix. I had a CEO ask me a couple of months ago, what was the one book? If you were only going to read one book, what one book would that be?
Hope for Leaders.
Hope for Leaders! Which we got 2 to give away for those of you that came out today. Mark will be taking care of giving that out, and there's a chapter in our book on this very topic. But yes. And then coaching wasn't taught to managers, just like they didn't know how to go about. I work with people, leaders all the day. They don't know how to talk to their employees. They just hope their employees never come and ask them anything. Which, I don't know how it was sold when they got promoted. Like, I don't know what they thought they signed up for, but it's like having children. When you sign up to have children, you never have to speak to them or do anything for them. I mean, where in the world would you ever think that? You would be surprised. You would be
I know
surprised.
some executives that think that way.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't lead, and people are forced to figure out resources on their own. Now, what I will say, though, leaders that I've worked for like that have made me stronger because I had to figure out how to do it, and I learned what not to do. But that's not how to run an organization. I mean, that's because I elected to take that unfortunate situation and do something with it. Most people won't. They'll just leave. They'll be very frustrated by it. So with that, I am excited to turn it over for the data piece because this is really where you can help sell the impact on coaching if you have some real data to back up some of the things that we've been talking about. So turn it over to Whitney.
Sorry, I'm a mom, so that scream is terrifying.
And I'm an aunt of a 2-year-old. I have her a lot.
I'll stand just to not mess up your camera thing here. So what I wanted to do is kind of just now turn this over into more like a case study and just show you guys, I literally have screenshots, I mean there's no words on any of the slides I'm going to share, of just some things we've done with data. A lot of this has been in conjunction with people that Hope is working with in a coaching context, and some of it has been independently with some other organizations. But just to basically have some dialogue around what are some ways you can infuse data into the coaching process to help kind of sustain the impact and increase the impact that it can have. So I want to start by the screenshot. So basically, we should never be doing data for data's sake. Data is really to support all of the developmental activities you're doing, and you need to be able to use data to tell a story. There's a really interesting expression that I heard about. If somebody tells you you have a green tail, they're crazy. If 2 people tell you you have a green tail, well, it's a conspiracy. But if 3 people tell you you have a green tail, you might want to turn around and look. And so that's kind of how I think about 360s. 360s is, my boss can tell me that I'm bad at something, but my boss just doesn't like me. 1 employee or 2 employees can complain that I'm not good at that, but they have it out to get me. But as soon as I start to hear it a little bit more frequently, it makes it a little bit more difficult for me to ignore, and it might be time for me to turn around and look. So to me, that's what 360s does. This is a 360 screenshot from a 360 that I've used And the purpose of this first slide is to see where the individual's perception aligned with everybody else's. And as Hope will tell you, we've had some really interesting ones where either the individual's perception was way, way high. I heard this funny thing, somebody said they thought that they walked on water and everybody else just thought they passed water. And I really liked that because I've certainly met those people. Yeah. So if their perception is that they are really excellent and all of a sudden they're getting this feedback that's like, it's actually not what you think. That has to be the first step. Otherwise, coaching is going to be completely ineffective. And if you as a coach, you're brought in like, oh, you need to work with Mark on, listening. Well, Mark doesn't think he's bad at listening. How effective is that coaching going to be, right? So this is the absolute foundational starting point, is seeing where does this person's self-perception, where is it? Does it align with, reality, if you will, the reality that's being experienced by the stakeholders in this person's success, their boss, their peers, their direct reports.
What would you say is the ideal number of people that should complete an assessment like that for an individual?
So this particular instrument that I use, they've done a lot of research into that, and they have found the optimal number to be 10 in any given group. So like 10 direct reports, 10 peers, that's kind of the max, anywhere between like 4 and 10. And I attended I attend the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology conference. That's where I geek out every year and make sure I'm getting all the latest and greatest research. And that was very much supported by the research coming from there too.
But what about if you don't have that?
So anything
don't have
less,
that option.
anything less than 3 is probably
Well,
not
don't you have to have for anonymity?
Yeah, for
3
anonymity.
in any group. So a peer group would have to have at least 3,
Yeah.
or you couldn't protect. Now the boss is the boss.
Yeah.
That's
Except when you have a really unself-aware boss. We had this situation where a CEO was the boss on the 360, and so their feedback is not anonymous. Everyone else's feedback is grouped with everybody else. All the other direct reports, peers, etc. And the CEO got very angry when they found out that their feedback
wasn't anonymous.
was not anonymous.
You
Do you think that might be the root cause of the problem here?
He goes, well, I would have been totally honest like I was. He said, if I would have known I was in that only category by myself, and I'm like,
we might have just figured out the problem, right?
right. So but 3 has to be to protect.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, on the self-perception piece, if this person's self-perception is way lower than everybody else, there are also some consequences there. They may lack confidence. I've heard some research recently that a strengths-based approach doesn't work with people like that because it's just they're not kind of hardwired to see themselves in that light. So a whole different approach is necessary. So ideally, we're trying to get somebody who has the self-awareness to know where their weaknesses and their strengths are both. But unfortunately, that's not always the case, and that has to be the starting place to lead to any behavioral change. So that's just kind of an example of where we see that. This is a different screenshot showing basically the different rater groups. So for this individual, you can't see the colors, it's fine. You can see where the self, the boss, the direct reports appears, where everybody fell out. And so for this individual, we're seeing that this particular group, it was like a, service group. So it was cross-functional peers. It was always kind of falling out to the left. And so we're like, okay, clearly, there's something going on there. This person isn't maybe providing adequate support to that group. Now, what I love to talk about is 360s are great when we're talking about an individual, creating this being the basis of an individual development plan. It creates so much data, great platform for discussions, all sorts of goodness you'll hear me talk about here. But what I get real excited about 360s is when we start looking at it at a macro level. So let's say we have a team of leaders and we've got 360 data on all of it. You can start to do some really cool stuff. So a couple examples I'm going to show you that we did for a company, we started to see for this organization that service group was always the one falling out on the left. And so when we, data is a needs assessment, right? I mean, it's a something that shines a spotlight on something that needs maybe further investigation, or we need to start asking some good questions about that. So what we found out as we started to look at this phenomenon was that this was a very siloed organization. So within, person's direct departmental direct reports and their kind of departmental peers, they were doing pretty well, but as we started to have to work cross-functionally, that's where things started to fall apart. So we were able to really show with some good data that was going on, other than this just kind of general, well, yeah, we don't really like to work with them over there.
Were you able to figured that out through qualitative data?
Yeah, it was very much supported by that as well, but that was not necessarily the part I was involved in. I'm a very quantitatively minded person.
Well, I am too, but I wondered how you figured that out.
Yeah, the qualitative follow-up to
Right.
this data was where they determined that that was going on,
Right.
but I wasn't directly involved in that piece of it. So yeah, I don't know if they did like interviews or whatever, but I know that was their conclusion. Okay. Was there anything else I wanted to say about that? No. All right. So this is one of my favorite things. So Hope mentioned that among those big symptoms of the lack of coaching in the organization was lack of communication from a manager and unclear understanding of goals and priorities. So one of the things in the 360 we were using that there's 18 competencies that we're measuring, but they're not all 18 going to be equally important for every leader. So the boss and the self have to pick the 6 that they think are most critical to their job. Do you know how often I find 0 agreement? The boss and the self pick 6 things that they think are most important to their job as a leader, and they don't pick any of the same 6 things. There is a huge light bulb that happens at that moment.
They're playing different games.
Yeah, because like, we don't even have to go into the competencies at that point. It's like, oh, no wonder you're not doing what I think you need to be doing. I never told you that you were supposed to be doing that. Or you thought you were supposed to be focused on delivering the product and, task management. I think you're supposed to be delegating and leading, and working up here. You think you're so that creates this amazing platform. Again, we're not even talking about competence here. We're talking about priorities and where you need to be spending your time. So it creates a great platform for the boss and the individual to kind of have that conversation about goals. Because sometimes it's hard to talk about goals. Sometimes they're a little nebulous. And so sometimes this can be a nice way to put that into kind of where the rubber meets the road.
And tie it into business strategy. So how are we going to take the big business goals and cascade that down?
Yeah.
Where is our direct impact to that?
So so that's kind of at your micro level, right? This is an individual and a boss talking about my priorities. As we start to take that company-wide and look at it at a macro level, this is showing kind of, okay, we assessed 9 leaders with 360s. Where were the bosses themselves of these 9 leaders choosing as important? So as an organization, the most common things that were chosen as one of the 6 most important things were communicating effectively, achieving results, facilitating team success, providing direction. Okay, I'm starting to see kind of a team coaching, mentoring kind of culture emerging there. They didn't choose work competently, takes action, displays commitment. So again, I think that kind of echoes that. You might see something very different if you did this at Disney or it kind of does reflect your culture. I had one CEO that flat out said, if any of my people choose a soft skill as one of the 6 most important things, they're fired. That was their culture. And
Wow.
gosh darn it, everybody knew that. Because if they didn't last long. So you're going to say something.
So, excluding that company,
Yeah.
how often do you find those same items falling on or rising to the top?
Communicating is usually up there, but the others really do vary. And it's pretty interesting because if I start to say, okay, does this reflect the culture, the leadership culture you want in the organization? That becomes kind of an interesting thing. That's like all of a sudden they're like, wait, nobody chose listening. Not a single person. Is that reflective of the kind of culture we want? And so it can bring to light some interesting disconnects.
And I think it also plays into, at least I found with the 360s, Whitney has done for me, is the level of leadership.
Yeah.
So,
that's true.
communicating does rise to the top, but then I see a lot, depending on if it's mid-level, the delegating.
Mhm.
So mid-level managers have a really hard time delegating, or sometimes even higher levels have a hard time doing that. And then your front line, you might see that be
the taking action.
completely different. So it's
Yeah.
really, I would say it's dependent
That's a really
on
excellent point.
level of leadership.
Well, I just find it's interesting that, if you're familiar with the Google study that came out on the most important aspect of teamwork and being on a great team is psychological safety, and it's an installation of trust is probably the most important thing on the whole skill, on the whole level, is that if you don't have that baseline, and sort of Lencioni wrote about it, about his functions too, absence of trust on the bottom. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. And I've seen that so many times lately. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into, and that's where we start, because that's where you have to start. Because if they don't trust each other, you can do everything else in the world, and it just falls apart.
Yeah. So I think this is such an amazing example because the whole idea here is how do we infuse some data into all this stuff we're talking about, right? So wouldn't it be fascinating if you had this data and then you led training, culture change around that and didn't see that rise to the top, right? So the whole idea is how do we kind of measure some of this and how do we get data around it? That would be fascinating, really cool.
I think it's sort of funny that communicates effectively is at the very top, but listens to others is.
This is a high level of leadership.
Right.
They want to
But
talk, not listen.
But it's like you can't communicate unless you have active listening.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like they're so closely associated, but there's a little disconnect.
Definitely.
Some people think communicating effectively means I just tell you.
Yeah.
I just tell you what to do, and if I've told you and you didn't get it, that's on you.
Yep. So look at this. Top 3, communicates effectively, achieves results, facilitates team success. This is where I get real excited. So this was some data I put together for this team. It was their top, well, I guess that's 6 leaders. I highlighted the 3 that were most important, right?
This is this is data that you,
Yeah.
survey data, right?
Yeah, this is 360 data
360
that I'm
data.
putting together in aggregate. So remember we saw that communicating effectively, facilitating team success, and achieving results, that team agreed that those were the most important 3 things. Communicating effectively was number 1, but 3 out of 6 of these managers, it's in their bottom 5 competencies out of 18. So there's thing number 1 that I noticed. My favorite thing that I noticed on this slide, this was a high-tech, high-growth company that their entire value proposition is innovation. 5 out of 6 of their senior leaders thinks creatively is one of their lowest items. And lest you think that is a fluffy construct, let me tell you the items that make up that. Approaches the job with imagination and originality, inspires innovation in the organization, is willing to take bold, calculated risks, and views obstacles as opportunities for creative change. If your top leaders are failing on that and your entire business lives and dies by innovation, what's going on? So I talked a minute ago about this is an opportunity now to dive into this, right? What are we doing? Are we hiring managers that just aren't good at this? That's one possibility. Are we saying we want innovation, but really squelching anybody that comes up with a good idea? Or do we need to give some people some tools? You know, do we need some coaching, some training? So this is like a live or die moment, right? That 360 data brought to light for them. And it was the data that allowed them to then ask those questions and come up with a strategy around it.
Or people got
Or
promoted.
die.
Promoted from the job of doing the task into these higher levels of leadership
Right,
without, again, helping coach that gap.
right.
And they didn't know how to be that. I mean, they knew how to take those creative, like the ideas that would come and go do them.
Right.
They didn't know how to come up with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Did they live or die?
So far, they're still alive. I'm not sure I'm not sure what that looks like.
Their financial profit is, yeah.
Were they impressed? I mean, did they have insights from this or no?
Yeah,
They
yeah. But they also had a leadership change very shortly after we got this data. So I'm not sure, to me that was like, okay, this is a big deal. And the people I was talking to at the time, they agreed it was a big deal. I'm not sure what. Kind of an interesting data point to add to this. So let's say I keep going back and forth between micro and macro, I realize, but now we're back to the individual. So let's say we have an individual who is terrible at listening. We'll come back to that example, right? Well, okay, we have decided now that this individual is a terrible listener, that we've gotten feedback from all of their peers and direct reports and boss that they're a bad listener. Now what do we do? Well, okay, we got coaching, we got training, we got books, we got, there's lots of things we can do, right? So one of the questions you might ask is, well, do we have any insight into why they're a bad listener? So this is like a self-report type of tool that it's called the Profile XT. It brings in thinking styles, so like cognitive ability type stuff, behavioral, kind of hardwired core behavioral traits, and then interest and motivation. So we could have a number of things going on here. We could have somebody who's super smart and is talking over people's heads, and so there's a communication disconnect happening. We could have somebody who's not as smart as the people they manage, and so the people they manage don't feel like they're being heard and understood. So it could be a legit cognitive ability disconnect there. We could have somebody who's super high on energy, so they're just go all the time and they never slow down enough to listen. We could have somebody who's super extroverted, so they just talk all the time and they're a bad listener. We could have an introvert that is just not good at kind of feeding back, maybe they are listening, but they're not good at expressing that the person has been heard, so parroting back that information. We could have any number of things going on here. And so your strategy on how to develop that skill of making people feel listened to is going to very much differ depending on what of those are kind of root causes. So pairing 360 data with something else that kind of gives you some additional insight into the person's DNA, the person's makeup, might be an additional data point to give somebody who's doing coaching, whether internal or external, kind of that additional insight.
Instead of just make them learn to listen.
Yeah.
Right. Godspeed.
Well, and so again, I think too, so like the items that contribute to listening, because listening is still, even though listening is a subset of communication, it's still pretty broad. So is the issue that this person interrupts all the time, or they don't summarize and check for understanding, or they don't solicit all points of view with an open mind, or they just already have their mind made? So it's like, what are the behaviors that are contributing to that? So all the 360s that I am a fan of are very behavioral in nature. I just think it's important to be able to drill back down to that behavioral level.
What I was taught at CTI was that, you can, with the coaching process, you're taking someone from a normal pathology, if you will, to a supernormal pathology. If someone truly does have a pathology, coaching may or may not be very effective in that situation. So how have you run into, I could think of a very recent case where I was coaching a CEO where I truly thought not only had a narcissistic personality disorder, but maybe even had bipolar disorder as well. And I found it extraordinarily difficult to coach that person. And so
I've had to fire people. I've had to fire people from coaching, and I'll never forget. This was just like 6 months ago. This guy started crying, and he said, "I feel like I've let you down." I said, "Oh, this wasn't for me." I was like, "You let yourself down." This was, he just didn't commit to. We would have sessions, and he would cancel at the last minute. He always had a surprise that would happen. And I talked to the HR person, and she's like, "We need to fire. We need to just, because unless this person is committed, right. Because coaching isn't for everybody, not everything needs to be coached, but it definitely doesn't need to be coached if the person is just going through the motions of something to like check off a box, or I'll say I've done it, because then that's again where we get back to this bad rep with coaching, is coaching doesn't work. But yeah, it's a two-way. You have to have that CEO that's willing to say, you know what? You're right. I see these weaknesses, and I see how it's limiting myself in my organization, and then be willing to do something about it.
And to your point, I've seen some whacked out things on the 360 results, and thank God I'm not the one who has to fix it. I give them
Just one question along those lines, because sometimes when you get into a coaching situation, it ends up turning into a therapy session.
It does.
And at that point, you really kind of have to excuse yourself, because that's not what I do.
Right. No, and I've done that. I had a guy, I walked in to coach him, and he sat there, and his daughter had just gotten expelled from school for drugs. She had drugs on her, and they threw her in jail, and so I was like, okay, I know we were supposed to talk about your communication plan for your team today. So I let him talk for 10 minutes, and then I recommended he seek out. I know they have a good strong EAP program at the company, because that was beyond, but it does impact, because you've got somebody that comes in, and you've got some strategic business goals that you're working with that person on, and that person looks at you and says, my wife just left me, or I just found out I had cancer, so it's, but that's where we, right, yeah. So I'm like, I acknowledge that, and I really encourage them to get help to that, or it could turn into therapy. It really could, really fast, and that's not the type of coaching and work that we do.
Our speaker from last month, Patsy Carruthers, spoke about change management, and she had certain people that just were not working out. She would try coaching them and to prepare for these changes and stuff. But when she came to the determination they were not able to do that, then she would actually coach them some more and say, "Well, this is not working for you here. What do you think would be a better fit for you somewhere else?" But I thought it was very interesting. It wasn't just like dumb. It was like, it was very...
Oh yeah, and I've helped people find jobs. I've talked to the HR person about it, and they're like, "You're very network. Can you get them another job?" So that company paid for me to spend 2 months with that person looking at their resume and taking them to networking events, and I did. I helped them find another job, and that was but that was just something that they felt that they wanted to do as an organization, to send that person out with a positive. Instead of firing them.
This is such a perfect segue, because that's exactly what what if they're just not the right person for the job, right?
They're not a bad person, they're just
Yeah,
not the right
it's
fit.
just not the right fit. And so this is and I want to throw this back to you guys for dialogue, which you're already dialoguing, but I'll continue that because, so this is an example of like the shaded regions would be the benchmark of what would be a very successful person in this job. The yellow blocks are where this person scores. All right, so some of these labels are intuitive enough that you can kind of look at it and figure it out, but we don't have to be specific about the slide, but what do we do when we have that situation? We have somebody who's just legitimately not the right fit for the job. What's coachable? What's not? What do you do? So I want to hear your all's perspective.
Well, do you look at other parts of the organization where they might fit in better?
I think that's one super legitimate strategy.
I mean, if you look at good to great, to use a good to great analogy, that everybody probably has a seat somewhere on the bus, but there's a ton of people that aren't sitting in the wrong seats. And so I think part of our job is to help the organization understand where people are better suited. And I'm dealing with this client in South Carolina right now. That's exactly what's going on, is that he was brought in to lead this organization, and he's not the right fit. He's brilliant, and there's other seats in the organization that he can fill. But he's not the right person. So for me, I think the coaching was beneficial in showing them that he's not the right fit here, but he could be a very valuable fit. And let's not cost the organization the $100,000 that we're going to spend if he leaves. So that's a very valuable coaching tool.
To give them a chance, because maybe if they got, to Whitney's point with the example earlier, maybe if they got some tools, that group could have become more innovative and more creative. So you give it a time, but I'm always, I always encourage HR people, I'm like, you've got to give this a definitive timeline.
Yeah.
This either changes within this amount of time, it flows, whatever, but you can't just endlessly say, we're going to get coaching and we'll just keep an eye on it, we'll monitor it. It's like, no, let's say we're going to coach for 6 months. At the end of 6 months, we're going to assess where it's at, and if it's not, then here is what's going to happen. But that surprise birthday party I talked about, I see happen in coaching all the time, where we don't define what happens. We're going to give it 6 months, but what happens in 6 months is not
Defined.
I also see the opposite of that too, though. I also see that some companies don't give you enough time to coach.
Exactly.
You start coaching 4 weeks later, they're ready to pull the plug at that point, and you're just starting to make progress. And all of a sudden, the manager's like, coaching's not working, we're going to let this guy go.
And I won't coach someone less than 3 months, and that's twice a month.
It's got to be 90 days.
Yeah, I do at least 3 months, twice a month, and we have contact in between. And if somebody won't sign up for that, then I will tell them it's not coaching you're looking for. Perhaps it's a seminar, perhaps it's because we're talking about different things. Yeah.
It's good to have benchmarks as opposed to having something just abstract.
Yeah.
Well, that's I think too. I think to me, looking at it like this is a much better way to say, you're just not the right fit here. Maybe you're a good fit somebody else. Just say, look, you are a much more patient-focused, methodical person. We're asking you to function in an environment that's super fast-paced. You have to do everything with a sense of urgency, and there's a lot of competing priorities. That's uncomfortable, right? So maybe we can find you a place that would be a better fit. Who doesn't want to be in a place where they're leveraging their strengths and are a good fit, right? It's good for the individual. It's not just good for the person. You're a low assertive person. We're asking you to be assertive all the time. Oh, that's horrible. And so I have a company I'm dealing with right now. Oh my gosh, huge multinational auto manufacturer who is trying to use assessments when they're promoting people to team leads, to group leads, right, in a manufacturing environment. But they want to have this perception of fairness because they're also union and whatever, right? So if somebody doesn't pass the test the first time that shows they're a good fit for being a team leader, well, we'll just let them take it again in a year. Well, guess what? If you're actually trying to predict whether or not somebody's going to be effective at this job, you better be using a tool that's measuring pretty hardwired characteristics. And guess what? That's not going to change. So they're trying to totally use a tool that's not, it's not designed to do what they want it to do. And so I'm helping them kind of navigate that process now and try to put something new in place because, what this is going to tell you is, just those first two things, the energy and the assertiveness, let's leave out the rest of it. This person is not going to be effective. They're going to be in an environment that asks them to be something they're not so much of every day that they're going to be miserable. It's going to lead to burnout. It's going to lead to ineffectiveness.
So the items in gray are the ideal areas. So what determines that? Is that something that's determined by the leadership, or is that based on industry, or how do you come up with that.
In a perfect world, it's based on real performance data. So we're actually looking at what systematically makes your top performers better than your bottom performers. That, of course, is not always possible, in which case we can do other job analysis type activities to determine that. So yeah, I mean, more data is always better in my mind. You know, I've done tons of studies. You guys talked earlier about cultures that are bad at getting people to leave. I had one company, they were doing salespeople, had 100 salespeople. It was in the like home improvement industry. 100 salespeople, very publicly ranked from number 1 to number 100. You knew if you were number 68, you know, based on objective sales criteria. We used this tool to create a benchmark. They wanted to, you know, see if they could do a better job of systematically hiring people who were going to be good at sales, right? 99.9% of, well, in every situation in the last 15 years, other than this one situation, people want to clone their top performers, right? So every time we do a benchmark, it's like we'll do, you know, we assess the top 9 people, we assess the bottom 9 people. We have a benchmark that you would have categorically hired 8 out of 9 of your top people, and you would have categorically ruled out 7 out of 9 of your bottom people, right? Whatever the numbers are, that's pretty good numbers, right? This company said, you know what, as a culture, we're so bad, we won't get rid of people. We have 50 bottom salespeople just sitting there, taking up space. We have all this lost opportunity. We just want to avoid hiring the bad ones.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. So
Let's not put the bar too high.
yeah. So we did the study. We assessed a handful of the top 15 people and a handful of the bottom 50 people, and we flip-flopped the way I would normally do it to make it more exclusive of the bottom people than inclusive of the top people. We would have correctly hired 5 out of 8 of the top people, but we would have categorically not hired 9 out of 10 of the bottom. And that's what they want. So, you know, it's pretty cool when you can have that level of
Data
confidence.
can be manipulated. Yeah.
Well, there can. I mean,
You
you
need
can.
it hard enough.
Yeah. But, you know, to be able to do that in that sort of a systematic way, I mean, that's huge. And so that was really, really a good thing for them. You know, the other thing, talking about the, you know, what do you do with this if somebody's mismatched? Now, if they were a fairly good match, but assertiveness was our main issue, right? They were low assertive. This is the kind of person who doesn't want to be assertive. But now we're going to promote them. And we know this is going to be a challenge, right, for this person right off the bat, as opposed to 6 months from now when we're frustrated with this individual who's not being assertive enough in their new leadership role. We know right off the bat that we are going to need some coaching around adaptive behavior. We're not going to train this person to be a highly assertive person, but we can absolutely give them the tools and strategies to be assertive when the situation calls for it without it taking a couple years off their life. And so that's, you know, that's a much more proactive, it's a much more data oriented. So to be able to have some of these conversations with actual data in front of you to say, look, you know, here's why you're not a good fit, here's where you might be a better fit. Or, you know, you're a good fit, but here's the one area that I think is going to be a big struggle. Let's put some strategies in place now to try to work that. It's just so much more powerful.
Well, and it gives you something to pull from when most people, or most managers in general, we've talked about, are poor with feedback.
Yeah.
It's because it's like going to take a test you didn't study for. Not only did you not study for it, you don't know what's going to be on it necessarily. So to have this, it's like getting understanding managers to get that commitment of, look, you have something to pull from. So you can have real conversations with people and hold them accountable to real things. So if they don't do it, all we have to do is go back to what we've talked about and what we've agreed upon, and it's not the surprise. But
So, you know, just to kind of sum up my part, and then we'll just, you know, can wrap up, we can have some more dialogue. But just to me, I feel like trying to do coaching in the absence of this kind of data, I don't get it. And again, you've already heard me say, I'm a data person, I don't have to do the coaching. But just philosophically, I don't understand how you're supposed to do it. You know, if all you're going on is, okay, the boss says this guy needs coaching on communication, or the person, we're relying on the person's self-awareness to know what they need coaching on. I'm not so sure about that. And then how do you track progress? And, you know, and I think too, what this brings to it is it's such a great platform to have some of these conversations that would be difficult to have without that data. It helps the person be more accepting of some of this if they're seeing it in black and white as opposed to just kind of hearing it in a more nebulous way. And then obviously you can look at it in that kind of macro way, diagnose some larger organizational culture issues when you have that data, and then measure the progress. So again, I just feel like there's so much power in infusing some of these different types of tools into that. So I just wanted to show you some examples of what we've done with that today. There are lots of good tools out there that can help you get this sort of data, you know, things like Strengths Finder and those sort of things. I don't do anything with those sorts of tools. A lot of what I do is pre-hire assessment strategy, and so a lot of the tools I use are appropriate for that application in addition to some post-hire applications. So when you guys started talking about Myers-Briggs earlier, it was everything I could do to just stay off my soapbox.
She knows I'm out there trying to use it for good.
That's right. You're using it for good. You're on the good side.
Is your argument the ipsative versus normative argument? Is that what your argument is?
It's one of several arguments. I have white papers I'll be happy to share. In fact, I have a book too. Where's my book go? It's over there. This just came out last week.
She's third down
This will be the
published.
second person, whoever takes this will be the second person I've given it to besides my mom. But my chapter in here is called The Death of Guess, and it's about how to use good data to make the hiring decisions, but then also how do you use it beyond that. So I've got a section on onboarding and coaching, team dynamics, leadership development, career pathing. So it's kind of about how to use various tools for those things. So we're going to do a drawing, and we have 2 of Hope's books and then one of these.
Kathy Fire.
I do, yeah. So, yeah, so that's my third chapter.
She's published in mine and then 2 on her own.
So I'm turning it back over to Hope to kind of wrap us up.
Yes, I will wrap up. So this last little part is really bringing together everything that we talked about. And so the next couple of slides, this is your recipe. So when you're going into organizations or you're in your organization and how are you selling all of the things that we talked about, I see the most critical thing around the coaching culture is how are we aligning coaching with business strategy? And we already talked about that a little bit. But, you know, I think there is such power when we coach people towards, you know, what is their impact on business? And that's normally not the conversation. It's just, I need you to be a better listener. Well, imagine tying that into, I need you to be a better listener because of this. You know, these are our overall business goals. This is how you impact that. And I need you to do that so that we can achieve that. Those, in my mind, are very different conversations than the ones that are being had. And I want to say with the 360, I am a big fan, although I don't always get the buy-in from it, of doing a pre and post 360 to the coaching. I mean, you talk about real data, and Whitney has a great comparative tool. So, and I've done it with a couple of clients that I've coached where, you know, 6 months down the road, we did the 360 again, and it does the comparative. This is where they were, this is where they are now. What were the things that we identified from the coaching development plan that they were going to work on, how they improved. So it's just a really powerful way that, as Whitney said, and we do it every day, how do we not have these things? We're not making the best decisions. We're making decisions, but we're not making the best decisions.
I mean, I was
Money,
told when I had the first 360, it's like, they're saying, are you aware it costs this amount of money? And I'm like, well, if you have to tell me this, it's like.
Yeah. If that's the first place you go is money, and I go back to what your question earlier, what is this costing you to not do it? And it's costing you something. It's just a quiet cost that will become very loud if you don't address it. And that's the sell that you have to make. Because, you know, a lot of times it's an HR person that quite honestly has got a leader on her back or a CEO on her back, like, just fix this, just fix it, just figure out something to do. And that's just not the ideal setup for this. I mean, it has to be buy-in from that. So these are just some other things that if you're going to build an amazing meal, this is how you build it. This is how you build the culture around it. You know, I think another big thing is how are you engaging leaders and how are the HR people, business partners, and advocates for this. I see a lot of organizations using their HR people as coaches, and we've set in on some panel discussions where they're training their HR people to be coaches like we coach. That can be challenging sometimes because they're having to wear many hats, and they're, you know, so how can they be that HR person and then, you know, be that coach? There can be some conflict with that, but I am seeing more and more certification for like the hardcore HR people, HR generalist people becoming the coach as well. And I just say, you know, look at what's going to work best for your organization. So what needs to change to make all of this happen? Well, first of all, just make, you know, engaging employees. How are we selling coaching? What is our definition of that? Are we getting people excited so that when somebody says, guess what? You get to be coached. They're like, yay! I mean, they're like so excited. They go home and they tell their kids about it. They're posting on Facebook, I'm getting coaching, and whatever, with a real big smile. You know, how do we generate that kind of excitement with people? And really, you know, setting the expectations. And it sounds so simple when you're leading people to set expectations. You know, what are my expectations for you? What are your it's that dialogue that goes back to that lack of communication. It's just easier for everybody to heads down do their job. But what is that costing you? What is that costing you? And making coaching a huge part of your performance management. I mean, you have the appraisal, you have the performance planning, but how are you doing those things without some type of coaching and feedback? So if you look at the whole pie, it needs to be part of it. You take out a big chunk, I don't know really how you're doing those other two things well. And I think the big thing is are we really looking at that? And we're only looking at that, in my opinion, when something explodes. And there's a problem, and there's an impact on business where it's costing us money. And I had somebody come in to my graduate school class I teach from Tuesday night from U of L, and she does research in this area. And what prompted one tech company to do it was they started looking at that they had 30% turnover, and the number that was attached to that turnover blew their minds. And they thought what we could do creatively and innovatively with that money, how we could expand this business if we reduce that from 30% to less. So just taking a look at, what are we doing that drive that? So how to cause the change, I can't speak enough, and I think we're all on the same page with this, of engaging senior management at whatever level that happens. And often I get invited in, and Whitney does too, often, is the HR level. The HR manager gets, and I'm always surprised. I have a number of organizations I work with that on their executive team or their senior leadership team, there's nobody from HR represented on that. It's operations, it's finance, but the HR person is director or manager. And that speaks volumes to me about what the organization thinks about as far as, and oftentimes the HR person reports to the finance person because training costs money. And that's typically the first thing that's cut when there's a budget cut, is training and marketing. We always go there. I don't understand. Because you're slow, you have time. You should be putting money to that. But just really getting them, senior leaders to understand that and modeling for it, and getting them to get coaching themselves is a truly powerful thing. Training your managers so that they can then, once an external coach leaves, if you have that, they can be doing that, but they should be setting all this and knowing how to set expectations before the coach even gets there. This shouldn't be a situation where the coach comes in to fix it, giving them the skills to have those critical, crucial conversations. I love this quote that I've come across because it is so true. At times when you're doing this, you're going to wonder, why am I helping this person that doesn't seem to be getting it? This is so frustrating. Why do I do what I do for a living? However, it's planting that seed. You have to be out there every day planting that seed for something to grow. And if you're never planting the seed, how in the world would you ever expect a leader to grow into what you need them to be? I mean, it's just that investment in time. So you have to ask yourself, are we willing to do that and not be able to see an immediate change today? Because that's always the thing when I go into coach. So how soon should we expect a change? Like what is an approximate? Can you give us, best case scenario? You start coaching this person tomorrow. Right, you start coaching this person tomorrow. Week, 2 weeks. I was like, and I will tease. I will say, well, that's only with my really exceptional people. They're like, seriously? You can see this all the time? And I'm like, no. I mean, it's who knows? It might be when they leave this company that they get it. I mean, you can't guarantee. You just have to know that you're doing the right thing by that person, developing them. So I will put up here our contact information, and we have our business cards over here. If we can ever do anything for you around data, assessments, leadership development, that's our area of expertise. But I would like